There are mornings when you open your eyes and the weight already presses against your chest, not the weight of blankets or the heaviness of sleep still clinging to your limbs, but something deeper, something that sits in the center of your being like a stone. You slept through the night. You did not wake in terror or pain, yet somehow you are already exhausted. Your body feels drained before the day has even begun, as if you have been running through dark forests in your dreams, fleeing from something you cannot name. You drag yourself from bed, and every movement feels like pushing through thick water. The simplest tasks become mountains: brushing your teeth, making coffee, speaking to another human being. All of it requires energy you do not have, energy that seems to have been stolen from you in the night by invisible hands. And the worst part, the part that frightens you most, is that no amount of rest makes this better. You can sleep for 10 hours and wake feeling as though you have not slept at all. You can lie in bed for days and still feel this profound, bone-deep exhaustion that will not lift, that will not leave, that follows you like a shadow you cannot escape. This tiredness is not in your muscles. It is not in your blood or bones. It lives somewhere else, somewhere physicians cannot reach with their tests and their prescriptions. You have heard all the explanations: low iron, poor sleep quality, depression, stress, and perhaps some of these things are true in their way. But in the quiet hours, when you're alone with yourself, that what you are experiencing goes deeper than any medical diagnosis can capture. What you feel is not physical tiredness. It is the tiredness of a soul that has been wounded, scarred by life in ways that leave marks invisible to the eye, but felt in every breath you take. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are not failing at some fundamental task of being human. What you are experiencing is something Dostoevsky understood better than perhaps any writer who ever lived. He knew that there exists a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much sleep you get or how hard you work. It is an exhaustion that comes from the soul, from that deep part of you that feels and remembers and carries the weight of everything you have lived through. Others will not understand this. They will look at you with confusion or judgment when you tell them you are tired, because to them, you appear to have no reason to be tired. You are not running marathons. You are not working 3 jobs. You have time to rest, and yet you remain exhausted. They cannot see the battles you fight inside yourself. They cannot see the weight you carry in places they do not know exist. They will tell you to exercise more, to eat better, to think more positively, as if your exhaustion were simply a matter of poor habits or weak will. But you know better. You know that what depletes you is not a lack of discipline, but an excess of feeling, an overabundance of awareness, a soul that has been asked to bear more than it was designed to carry. Dostoevsky would tell you that this tiredness is not your failure. It is your testimony. It is the proof that you have lived deeply, felt intensely, and refused to turn away from truths that others prefer to ignore. What you call tiredness, what you experience as this relentless, inexplicable exhaustion, Dostoevsky would call something else entirely. He would call it the vestige of a wounded soul, not vestige in the sense of something small or insignificant, but vestige in its truest meaning, the trace, the mark, the evidence of something that has happened to you. Your tiredness is not a symptom of illness. It is the scar tissue of your inner life, the visible sign of invisible wounds. In his novels, Dostoevsky created characters who carried this same exhaustion. Raskolnikov, after his crime, was not physically ill, yet he could barely move, barely function. His exhaustion was the weight of a soul fractured by its own actions, by the terrible knowledge of what he had done and what he had become. Prince Myshkin, that beautiful soul, too pure for a corrupt world, moved through life with a gentle weariness, as if the very act of existing among humans who could not see what he saw drained him of all vitality. These characters were tired not because they lacked rest, but because they carried wounds that could not heal through sleep, wounds inflicted not on their bodies, but on the deepest part of their being. Dostoevsky understood that the soul can be injured in ways that are far more devastating than any physical harm. A broken bone heals in weeks. A wounded soul can bleed for years, decades, a lifetime. And this wounding, this deep injury to the inner self, manifests as exhaustion that seems to have no source and no cure. It is tiredness that sleep cannot touch, because it originates in a place sleep cannot reach. The soul becomes wounded in ways that are difficult to name, but impossible to forget. Some wounds come from betrayal, from the moment you realized that someone you loved was not who you thought they were, that the trust you placed was misplaced, that the person you gave your heart to handled it carelessly or with cruelty. That kind of betrayal does not simply hurt. It tears something inside you, leaves a wound that bleeds invisibly, draining your energy with every beat of your heart. Dostoevsky knew this intimately. He was betrayed by friends, by lovers, by the very country he loved. In The Brothers Karamazov, he wrote of Ivan's exhaustion in the face of a world filled with senseless suffering, of a soul wounded by the recognition that innocence is punished and cruelty often goes unpunished. Ivan's tiredness was not laziness. It was the exhaustion of a mind that had seen too much, understood too deeply, and could not look away. Other wounds come from disillusionment, from the slow or sudden realization that the world is not what you were promised it would be. Perhaps you believed in justice, in goodness, in the idea that hard work and honesty would be rewarded, that kindness would be met with kindness, that truth would prevail. And then life showed you otherwise. You watched good people suffer while cruel people prospered. You saw lies accepted as truth and truth rejected as lies. You tried to live with integrity and found yourself punished for it, mocked for it, left behind because of it. This disillusionment is a wound that many carry. It is the wound of innocence lost, of hope eroded, of faith in humanity gradually destroyed by the evidence of what humans actually do to each other. Dostoevsky wrote extensively about this in Notes from Underground, where the underground man is exhausted not from activity, but from the burden of consciousness itself, from seeing clearly in a world where most people prefer blindness. Then there are the wounds that come from carrying too much for too long. Perhaps you are someone who feels deeply, who absorbs the pain of others without meaning to, who cannot turn away from suffering, even when turning away would protect you. You have carried the grief of friends who had no one else to tell. You have held the secrets of people who needed someone to trust. You have offered your strength to those who were too weak to stand, and you did this not because you wanted praise, but because you could not do otherwise. Your soul is built in such a way that it responds to pain, reaches toward it, tries to heal it, or at least hold it, so others do not have to hold it alone. Dostoevsky understood this quality. In The Idiot, Prince Mishkin embodies this capacity to feel and carry the suffering of others. He moves through the world absorbing the pain and darkness of everyone he meets, and it exhausts him, drains him, slowly destroys him, not because he is weak, but because he is too open, too compassionate, too unable to protect himself from the wounds of others. If you are someone like this, your tiredness is the accumulated weight of all the pain you have carried, not just your own, but the pain of others that somehow became yours as well. Some wounds come from the simple act of becoming conscious, of waking up to realities that most people keep hidden from themselves. You have seen through the illusions that make life bearable for others. You have recognized the emptiness behind pursuits that once seemed meaningful. You have understood the suffering that underlies all human existence, the fragility of everything we build, the inevitability of loss and death. This consciousness is itself a wound. Dostoevsky wrote about this extensively, particularly through the character of Ivan Karamazov, whose tiredness stems from his inability to accept a world where children suffer, where innocence is violated, where God, if God exists, seems absent or indifferent. This kind of consciousness cannot be unknown. Once you see, you cannot unsee. And seeing clearly, seeing truthfully, is exhausting in a way that no one who still lives in comfortable illusions can understand. These wounds do not heal the way physical injuries heal. You cannot put a bandage on a wounded soul. You cannot stitch it closed with thread. The soul heals according to its own mysterious timeline. And sometimes it does not heal at all. Sometimes it simply learns to carry its wounds differently, to integrate them, to make them part of its structure, rather than something foreign that must be expelled. Dostoevsky knew this. He carried his own wounds until the day he died. The trauma of the mock execution he endured, standing before a firing squad believing he would die, only to be spared at the last moment. The years in Siberian prison camp, the brutality he witnessed and experienced, the gambling addiction that ruined him financially, the deaths of loved ones, including his first wife and his beloved daughter. These wounds never fully healed. They became part of who he was, and he transformed them into art, into literature that speaks to wounded souls across time and space. Your tiredness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something happened to you. Your soul was wounded, perhaps in one devastating moment, or perhaps through a slow accumulation of smaller injuries that eventually became too much to bear. And now you're exhausted, not because you are weak, but because healing requires enormous energy, more energy than you have available. And so you remain in this state of depletion, unable to fully recover because recovery demands resources your wounded soul does not possess. What makes this exhaustion even more difficult is that it is largely invisible to others. If you had a broken leg, people would see the cast and understand why you cannot run. But a wounded soul shows no external evidence of its injury. You look fine. You can still perform the basic functions of life. And so people expect you to function as if nothing is wrong, while inside you are screaming with exhaustion that has nowhere to go and no way to be expressed that others can understand. Dostoevsky's characters often lived in this strange double existence. On the outside, they appeared to be managing, going through the motions of normal life. But inside, they were collapsing, fragmenting, barely holding themselves together. This is what happens when the soul is wounded. The external self continues, while the internal self is in crisis, and the gap between these two realities creates an additional exhaustion. The exhaustion of pretending, of performing normalcy when nothing feels normal, of hiding the depth of your pain because revealing it would only invite judgment or misunderstanding. You become tired from the very act of existing in a world that cannot see what you are going through, that has no language for this kind of suffering, that offers solutions designed for problems you do not have, while ignoring the actual wound that bleeds beneath everything you do and say and feel. Dostoevsky did not offer easy answers or quick solutions to the exhaustion of a wounded soul. He was not a writer of self-help or simple remedies, but he did offer something more valuable: understanding. He offered the knowledge that you're not alone in this, that others have felt what you feel, that this tiredness is not proof of your failure, but proof of your depth. In Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov's path through exhaustion is not a path of cure, but a path of transformation. He does not suddenly become energetic and happy. He moves through his exhaustion, allows it to break him down completely, and in that breaking discovers something new, a different way of being, a relationship with his own suffering that transforms it from pure burden into something that contains, however painful, a seed of redemption. This is what Dostoevsky understood. The exhaustion of a wounded soul cannot be cured by rest or distraction or positive thinking. It can only be transformed through a process that honors the wound, that acknowledges its reality, that allows the soul to express what it has been through, rather than forcing it to pretend everything is fine. Your tiredness wants to be witnessed. It wants to be acknowledged as real, as significant, as worthy of attention and care. It wants you to stop treating it as an inconvenience or a weakness and start treating it as a message, a communication from the deepest part of yourself about what you have endured and what you need in order to begin the slow process of healing. The path Dostoevsky would point you toward is not a path of returning to how you were before the wounding. That person no longer exists. The wound has changed you fundamentally, and trying to return to an earlier state of innocence or energy is both impossible and misguided. Instead, the path is through the wound itself, through the tiredness rather than around it. This means first allowing yourself to feel the full weight of your exhaustion without judgment, without the constant pressure to be more productive, more energetic, more like others who seem to move through life with ease. Your soul is tired because it has been through something. Honor that truth. Stop fighting against your own need for rest, for withdrawal, for time to simply be still and broken and exhausted without having to explain or justify it to anyone. Dostoevsky's characters often had to collapse completely before any transformation became possible. They had to hit bottom, had to stop pretending, had to allow the weight of their wounds to pull them down into darkness. Only there, in that place of total honesty about their condition, did something new become possible. This is not about romanticizing suffering or making exhaustion into a virtue. It is about recognizing that healing happens on its own schedule and according to its own logic, and that logic often requires you to stop, to surrender, to cease the constant activity that prevents you from feeling what you actually feel. Second, this path requires you to find ways to give your wound a voice. Dostoevsky wrote, "That was how he transformed his own suffering into something that could speak, that could reach others, that could turn private agony into shared meaning." You do not need to be a novelist, but you do need to find some way to express what you carry, whether through writing in a journal, speaking to someone who can truly listen without trying to fix you, creating art or music, or simply allowing yourself to cry, to rage, to feel without censoring or controlling the expression. The wound wants to be known. When you keep it silent, when you bury it under forced positivity or distraction, it grows heavier and the tiredness deepens. When you give it space to speak, even if only to yourself, something loosens. The exhaustion may not disappear, but it shifts, becomes less suffocating, more workable. Third, you must learn to distinguish between the activities that truly nourish your wounded soul and the activities that simply distract from the wound or drain you further. In your exhaustion, you may not have energy for much, but what little energy you have must be directed toward what actually helps, rather than what you think should help or what others tell you will help. Maybe what helps is silence and solitude, rather than social interaction. Maybe it is time in nature, rather than therapy sessions. Maybe it is creative expression, rather than intellectual understanding. Only you can know what your soul actually needs, and discovering this requires paying attention to how you feel after different activities. Which ones leave you slightly less tired, and which ones deplete you even further. Your exhaustion is not permanent, but neither will it vanish quickly or easily. The soul heals slowly, in its own time, according to rhythms that cannot be rushed or controlled. Dostoevsky himself lived with his wounds until death, but those wounds transformed over time. They became integrated into his identity, part of his deepest wisdom, the source of his compassion and insight. He did not transcend his suffering. He learned to carry it consciously, to make it meaningful, to use it as a lens through which to see and understand the suffering of others. This is the possibility that exists for you as well. Your wound, the source of your exhaustion, can become over time not just a burden, but a teacher, something that gives you depth and wisdom and compassion that you would not have otherwise. This does not happen through any act of will. It happens through staying present to your experience, through refusing to abandon yourself in your tiredness, through treating your wounded soul with the tenderness and patience it deserves. You do not need to be healed to be worthy. You do not need to overcome your exhaustion to have value. You are valuable now in your brokenness, in your tiredness, in your struggle to simply make it through another day. Dostoevsky would see you as one of his own characters, someone wrestling with something profound and real, someone whose exhaustion is not a flaw, but a mark of having lived with honesty and depth in a world that often rewards neither. The tiredness you feel is not physical. It is the vestige of a wounded soul, the sign of battles fought and losses endured and truths confronted. It is the weight of consciousness in a world that prefers unconsciousness. the burden of feeling deeply in a society that values numbness, the cost of refusing to turn away from suffering, even when turning away would be easier. You are tired because you have lived. You are tired because you have felt. You are tired because you have not protected yourself from reality by hiding behind illusions and distractions. This tiredness is your truth. It is your testimony. It is the proof that you have been wounded and that you are still here, still breathing, still moving forward, even when forward feels impossible. Dostoevsky would honor your exhaustion. He would see it not as weakness, but as strength, the strength required to keep going when your soul is carrying wounds that others cannot see or understand. He would tell you that your tiredness matters, that it means something, that it is part of a larger story of transformation that you're living even when you cannot see where that story is leading. You may never return to the energy you had before you were wounded. That version of you existed in a different world, a world where certain things had not yet happened, where certain truths had not yet been seen. But you can discover a different kind of energy, one that emerges not from innocence, but from integration, not from ignoring your wounds, but from honoring them, from allowing them to become part of your wisdom rather than something you must constantly fight against or hide from others. This new energy, if and when it comes, will feel different. It will not be the bright, naive energy of someone who has not yet been broken. It will be the quiet, steady energy of someone who has been broken and has learned to continue anyway, who carries their wounds consciously and uses them to understand and help others who are wounded in similar ways. Your exhaustion is not the end of your story. It is a chapter, perhaps a long chapter, but not the conclusion. And within that chapter, if you can approach it with the honesty and compassion that Dostoevsky would encourage, you may find that your wounds and the tiredness they cause are slowly transforming you into someone deeper, wiser, more genuinely human than you were before the wounding occurred. If any part of this reflection found you, if you recognized yourself in these words about the tiredness that comes from a wounded soul, I invite you to share in the comments which truth resonated most deeply with you. Was it the recognition that your exhaustion is not weakness, but testimony? The understanding that wounds of the soul cannot heal through physical rest alone? Perhaps it was the idea that your tiredness is transforming you rather than destroying you. Your words may reach someone else who feels alone in their exhaustion, someone who needs to know they are not failing, but enduring something profound. If you want to continue exploring these truths about the soul, about suffering, about the hidden meanings in our deepest struggles, subscribe to this channel for more reflections in the spirit of Dostoevsky's wisdom. And when you are ready, consider watching the next video about why isolation sometimes feels safer than connection, where we explore what Dostoevsky understood about the wounded soul's need for a solitude and the difference between loneliness that destroys and solitude that heals. Thank you for being here, for listening, for allowing these words to meet your tiredness with understanding rather than judgment. Your exhaustion is real, your wound is real, and you are not alone in carrying what you carry.